Hello and welcome to this edition of Wineskins, a program that features reflections on the lives of the saints and sacred scriptures, along with information on topics and issues from a Catholic perspective. I'm Father Jim Corda. Wineskins is brought to you by the annual Bishop's Appeal, the Catholic Communication Campaign, and St. Paul's Catholic Books and Gifts, a division of the Society of St. Paul. On our show today, I will interview John Allen from the First Friday Club. We will also look at the life of St. Josephine Bakhita, as well as reflections on the readings for this fifth Sunday in Ordinary Time. That and more coming up on Wineskins. And now we will hear more about Catholic charities in the Diocese of Youngstown by Father Jack Lavelle, who will tell us about the annual Bishop's Appeal.
The Diocese of Youngstown will inaugurate the 20th Annual Bishop's Appeal for Catholic Charities and Church. Although the history of our diocese has been rich in charity, it was 20 years ago that in solidifying this special collection, we not only sought to meet the needs of the work of Catholic charities, but also a variety of ministries throughout our diocesan church. For the past 20 years, nearly $50 million has been raised from men and women in parishes throughout our 6 counties, recognizing the need to follow our baptismal call, to serve, to reach out, and to care for all in need. As we prepare for a new Bishop's Appeal and celebrate these 20 years of its great work, we are each invited to reflect on those ways in which we are called to serve. And many are asked also to recognize, to move beyond simply filling out a pledge card, but also those ways in which we offer ourselves. And so let's reflect a little on the many ministries and the many activities that flow from the annual Bishop's Appeal. As mentioned, its primary case is the work of Catholic charities. 2/3 of all monies raised in the annual Bishop's Appeal helps to support that work of charity across our 6 counties. In each of our counties, we have a recognizable Catholic Charities agency, ready and willing to help and assist all in need. Some of the primary ministries of Catholic charities are focused on the very young through our First Step programs, recognizing the need to work with young parents that might not have all of the tools and all of the abilities to raise and care for their children. Perhaps their children will be in need of formula, diapers, clothing, along with case management to help them recognize those ways in which they can strive to care for their children on their own. And so we are very grateful for the work of the Bishop's Appeal that helps to provide those very tangible needs for the infants and toddlers in our society. There's also the need to help families continue to maintain their own dignity and their own viability through perhaps food donations, help with utilities or rent, and also, as we see an aging population in our diocese and counties, the need to help older people with medications and perhaps even food themselves. In one of the most recent statistics, the Warren-Youngstown Canton area was one of the largest areas in terms of food insecurity among seniors. And so 2/3 of the Bishop's Appeal helps to make a very real difference in the lives of all of the people in our 6 counties. And 1/3 of the Bishop's Appeal funds goes to assist in other diocesan ministries, youth and young adult ministry, religious education, worship and liturgical functions, the ability to continue to train ministers to go out and serve in a variety of needs of our diocesan church. We have been greatly blessed over these 20 years with the formalization of the Bishop's Appeal. As we celebrate this 20th year, Bishop Murray and the priests of the diocese are asking you to generously give whatever you can to assist in the support of these ministries. This year, we have set a record goal of $4.2 million, hoping that that money will come from our parishes to assist in the needs of our church. The first weekend of February, we will be inviting people in all of our parishes to reflect and prayerfully respond in whatever way possible. In advance, I thank you for your generosity. I thank you for your loving support of all of our brothers and sisters in need and to continue the work of our church throughout our 6 counties. When you are given the information about the Bishop's Appeal, please take some time in your parish to prayerfully reflect and respond. Again, thank you for the many blessings that you have been to the people of our diocese over these past years, and may the 2016, the 20th Annual Bishop's Appeal, be a tremendous success for charity and church. For Wineskins, I'm Father Jack Lavelle.
Tomorrow, the church celebrates the feast of St. Josephine Bakhita. To tell us more is Lou Jacquet. He is from St. Brendan Church in Youngstown.
Mother Josephine Bakhita was born in Sudan in 1869 and died in Italy in 1947. Divine Providence, which cares for the flowers of the fields and the birds of the air, guided her as a Sudanese slave through innumerable and unspeakable sufferings to human freedom and to the freedom of faith, and finally to the consecration of her whole life to God for the coming of His kingdom. Bakhita was not the name she received from her parents at birth. The fright and the terrible experiences she went through made her forget the name she was given by her parents. Bakhita, which means fortunate, was the name given her by her kidnappers. Sold and resold in the markets of Egypt, she experienced all the humiliations and sufferings of slavery, both physical and moral. As she grew older, she experienced long, painful years of sickness. Mother Bakhita continued to witness to faith, goodness, and Christian hope. To those who visited her and asked how she was, she would respond with a smile, "As the Master desires." During her agony, she relived the terrible days of her slavery, and more than once she begged the nurse who assisted her, "Please, loosen the chains, they are too heavy." It was Mary Most Holy who freed her from all pain. Her last words were, "Our Lady," and her final smile testified to her encounter with the Mother of the Lord. Mother Bakhita breathed her last on February 8, 1947, at the convent in Italy, surrounded by her religious sisters. A crowd quickly gathered at the convent to have a last look at their Mother Moretta, as she was known, and to ask for her protection from heaven. The fame of her sanctity continues to spread to all the continents, and many are those who receive graces through her intercession. The cause for her beatification began 12 years after her death, and on December 1, 1978, the Church proclaimed her blessed. She was canonized in St. Peter's Square on October 1, 2000 by Pope St. John Paul II. The first reading of her Mass emphasizes the spousal relationship of the person consecrated by vow and the Lord. It's a relationship based on mutual love, respect, and fidelity. In the prayer over the gifts, we admire the wonder of God's love in the life of Josephine and her witness to Christ. The second reading also emphasizes the spousal relationship in terms of a lifelong commitment, but insists as well on the dedication of the Virgin to the work of the Lord in imitation of Him. The Gospel passage speaks of the free will choice of the Virgin who chooses the better part by remaining single. The prayer after communion asks that the Eucharist renew our courage and strength. It reads, "Lord God, may the Eucharist renew our courage and strength. May we remain close to you, like St. Josephine, by accepting in our lives a share in the suffering of Jesus Christ, who lives and reigns with you forever and ever." For Wineskins, I'm Lou Jacquet.
Hello, this is Eileen Novotny for Wineskins. Today we are blessed by the presence of John Allen. And for those of you who might not be familiar with John, he's the associate editor of Crooks, which is like a newsletter magazine, and he specializes in coverage of the Vatican and the Catholic Church. John has written 11 books on the Vatican and Catholic affairs, and he's also a popular speaker on Catholicism, both in the United States and internationally. John does get around at the Vatican and with the Pope, and so we're looking forward to some of his comments here today. Recently, the Pope was in Africa, so let's start out with that, talking about some of the things that came out of his travels through Africa. And one thing I had read is that in the Catholic Church, we talk about the teaching authority coming from Scripture and tradition. But people are saying that on a personal level, Pope Francis adds a teaching from what he finds in the poor.
Eileen, which people are saying that? Let's start with that.
All right. If you clarify that, we'd appreciate it.
Because what you're actually doing there, of course, is quoting a column, my Sunday All Things Catholic column, which I wrote about the Pope's trip to Africa. Let me start by saying I am honored to be with you here today. It's an honor to be on Wineskins. Terrific program. You all do great work. So
thank you.
Auguri, as we would say in Italy. Okay. The trip to Africa, which took Francis to Kenya, Uganda, and the Central African Republic, was the 11th foreign trip of his papacy. And the main news headline, of course, came at the end when he went to the Central African Republic, because it was the first time in the modern era any pope has actually stepped into an active war zone. There was a bloody conflict underway in the Central African Republic since 2013 that has claimed more than 6,000 lives in a country of about 4 million people and has left half the country that are in refugee camps or internally displaced. Francis was counseled by virtually everybody that the security risks were just too daunting to do this, including the country's president, who wanted him to restrict his activities entirely to the airport because it was the only place that she felt she could keep safe. But he was so determined. This is how determined the Pope was. On the Alitalia flight, on the way to Africa, he went up to the cockpit, as he always does, to say hi to the pilots. And semi-jokingly, he told the pilot, look, if you don't feel like you can land in the Central African Republic, just give me a parachute, because one way or the other, I'm getting there. Because, he wants to be a peace pope, and he felt he had the chance to make a difference. So I was very struck by that, obviously. But one of the cornerstone moments of the trip earlier was in Nairobi, the capital of Kenya, when he visited one of the notorious slums in the ring in Nairobi, where you find the poorest of the poor. And he spent more time there than he was planning to. It was supposed to be a very quick drive-by. In the end, he was there more than an hour. He was obviously moved by the experience. And in his talk, he made a point that I think really opens a window onto the heart and mind of this Pope. Because what he said was, the poor aren't just objects of charity. They're not just problems that have to be solved. He argued that actually poor communities often preserve a wisdom about life rooted in the gospel and rooted in basic human values that are kind of lost on the affluent. He quoted from a text that a number of priests in Argentina who work in the vicias miserias, the villas of misery, which is what Argentines call their slums, had written, and obviously very familiar to him. And I think the takeaway there is that for Pope Francis, when he thinks about what he wants to accomplish as Pope, yes, of course, that's rooted in Scripture, that's rooted in the tradition of the Church. He said multiple times he sees himself as a son of the Church. But I think almost with equally spiritual fervor, he's also listening to the poor and trying to take seriously the experience of the poor, the needs of the poor, the values of the poor, as sort of a touchstone for his agenda.
I appreciate you giving us that insight into who the man is. He just doesn't talk. I think he really walks it.
That's the secret of Pope Francis's appeal. I have said, and I sometimes get in trouble for this from the pious Catholic crowd, but I think it's true, that from a media point of view, from a purely secular point of view, Pope Francis, in terms of his profile, is the new Nelson Mandela. That is, he's become that new figure on the global stage that is just unquestionably a source, a kind of moral point of reference, right? People look to him to know where the side of the angels is. And I think it's because of this perception, as you say, that he walks his own talk, that this thing about humility and simplicity and love of the poor and love of ordinary people, isn't just some kind of faux PR gesture, but it's the product of a life. And that, I think, is undeniably attractive to people.
He wrote a document, Laudato Si, on care for our common earth. And a lot of the concerns in his comments on climate changes and things go back to how this is profoundly affecting the poor. If the poor have bad water, they can't go out and buy a bottle of water.
Yeah, I think probably one of the distinctive elements of Laudato Si, which of course is the first time any pope has ever devoted an entire encyclical to environmental questions, but one of its distinctive features is the insistence that the struggle against global warming and climate change and the struggle against poverty are intrinsically and organically linked. Because while it is basically the affluent societies of the world who create environmental problems, it is disproportionately the poor who bear the brunt, who suffer those problems. And so for him, these are in some ways the same question.
He also speaks of a new colonialism. I'm not sure that I have a handle on that myself. Would you address that?
That's sort of a different version of a phrase the Pope uses a lot, which is ideological colonization. And it's an argument basically from the developing world directed to the developed world. And there is this perception that colonialism has not gone away, it's just sort of shifted guise. That these days it's no longer political and military colonialism, it's more often economic and cultural colonialism. You'll hear this a lot from the African bishops, for example, who will talk about the way that some Western governments and Western NGOs are using economic pressure to try to force Africa to adopt measures such as, for example, the legalization of gay marriage or the legalization of abortion that are foreign to their culture and are basically saying, we're not going to give you development aid unless you adopt the policies that we like. And, in America, debates over those sorts of issues generally break left-right, right? So we would expect progressives would be in support of those things, conservatives would be opposed to them. But in many parts of the developed world, this isn't a left-right issue. It's a north-south issue, okay? And from their point of view, they don't want somebody else's set of values to be crammed down their throats. And so when the Pope talks about ideological colonization, when he talks about new forms of colonialism, that's largely what he has in mind.
Okay, thank you. I really appreciate clarifying that. Another thing I've picked up on is his concerns about religious fundamentalism. And certainly we see a lot of the violence and war and problems in the world flow out of that. And I know Catholics, we have our issues with that topic too.
Well, sure. I mean, when the Pope was in Africa, when he was in the Central African Republic, probably the most dramatic moment of his itinerary was when he went to a mosque in a neighborhood of Bangui, the national capital, that is considered a no-go zone even for international observers because it's under the control of jihadist forces. And his message there basically was that religions, yes, they can be part of the problem, but they can equally be part of the solution. And he was trying to urge responsible leaders of all faiths to come together to stand up against extremism, terrorism in the name of God, and so on. As you say, it's a global problem, and it's one that Christians often bear the brunt of. I mean, let's remember that we live in a world in which Christians are, statistically speaking, by far the most oppressed religious minority in the face of the planet in a growing number of places where we've seen entire Christian communities under assault. In the Middle East and in parts of Southeast Asia and so on. It's certainly not the case that Christians are the only ones suffering, but Christians today know in their bones what the price in blood of religious hatred is, and that gives us, I think, a special motive, and that's where Pope Francis is coming from in trying to respond to it.
Just my own thought is that Pope Francis sometimes comes across as an Old Testament prophetic voice.
Very much, particularly sometimes when I listen to Francis talk about the economy. There's sort of this righteous indignation against injustice that, seems almost sometimes to leap off the pages of the book of Jeremiah. However, let me say this. I think one other element where you see that kind of Old Testament prophet streak is his unpredictability, his capacity for surprise. I sometimes say that Francis ought to come with a warning label like a pack of cigarettes that says, caution, predictions are hazardous to your health, because you just never know what he's going to do. Now, in that spirit, here in talks that I'm giving in Youngstown and in Akron, I'm going to commit professional suicide by presenting 5 predictions for Pope Francis in the new year. So just to give your listeners a little taste of something that I'm probably going to end up with egg on my face in the next 12 months for having said. But I'll give you one. If we get new cardinals next year, okay, which we may or may not, but if we do, a lot of Americans are wondering, are we going to get one? And most people think if we do, it's either going to be in L.A. with Archbishop Jose Gomez or in Chicago with Archbishop Blaise Cupich. I'm here to predict that if there is a new American cardinal, it's not going to be either of those guys. It's not going to be in any of the traditional centers of ecclesial power in this country, because that's not what Francis does. I mean, look what he's done in Italy. He's not given cardinals to Turin and Venice. He's given them to Perugia and Ancona. In the Philippines, he didn't give a cardinal to Cebu. He gave it to Cotabato. In Haiti, he bypassed the capital to name a guy from a small southern rural diocese that nobody had ever heard of. So my prediction, if there is a new American cardinal in 2016, it's going to be Bishop Jerry Kikanis of Tucson, Arizona. What that would do is it would make a statement about immigration and the importance of the border. And Kikanis is a social justice-oriented man of the people, very much cut in the same cloth of Pope Francis, so it would be kind of a double play that would accomplish both the kind of personnel move Francis wants to make and the kind of political statement he wants to make. So you heard it here first. If it happens,
okay,
red hat for Tucson in 2016.
Okay, and I'm going to be watching that for sure.
And if I can steal 10 seconds, let me just say about these First Friday outfits in Youngstown and Akron, it is astonishing the amount of effort and passion that people who are involved in those things devote in them. I'm on the Catholic lecture circuit all the time. I am here to tell you, Things like this don't exist other places. They are crown jewels of the church in this part of the country. Do whatever you can to support them.
For Wineskins, I'm Eileen Novotny.
For more information on that current issue and to listen to Wineskins, visit the website of the Catholic Diocese of Youngstown at www.doi.org. Stay with us. We'll be back in a moment.
The Johnsons enjoy Friday dinners out. Nothing fancy, just time together to reconnect as family. They make sure others eat as well. By giving to Catholic Charities of Youngstown, the Johnsons join other angels who care for those in need, regardless of religion or race. Show your wings with a gift to Catholic Charities, changing lives one family at a time, providing housing, emergency financial assistance, senior services, and more. Give now at ccdoi.org.
The song we have for you today is from the CD by the Kellenberg Memorial High School Choir and their 25th anniversary collection.
Day after day, I roam all alone, wondering where I fit in. In the moments of silence, I realize the selfishness of my sin. And I'm one step closer to you, oh Lord. I don't know what I would do. If you weren't present, my heart would be empty. I'm one step closer to you. As I learn to give more to others, thinking less of myself, pick up your cross and discover that love is the true secret to wealth. And I'm one step closer to you, oh Lord. I don't know what I would do. If you weren't present, my heart would be empty. I'm one step closer to you. The sweetness of life when I am worshiping you, I'll soar through the world like I'm singing your song, praise you in all that I do. And I'm one step closer to you, oh Lord. I don't know what I would do. If you weren't present, my heart would be empty. I'm one step closer to you, and I'm one step closer to you, oh Lord. I don't know what I would do. If you weren't present, my heart would be empty. I'm one step closer to you.
And to tell us about the scriptures for this fifth Sunday in Ordinary Time is Deacon Mike Kajancic. He is from St. Charles Church in Boardman.
While most scholars might look at today's passage with all kinds of seriousness and solemnity, I'm not a scholar. So I look at it a little differently, with a sense of humor. But it's still a powerful passage with a powerful message. Imagine Peter and his crew along the shores of Lake Gennesaret, cleaning their nets after a hard night of catching nothing, except maybe some dead crabs, an old sandal, a broken pot, or maybe some driftwood. And Jesus comes along and tells them, "Go back out and lower your nets." Now maybe Peter starts thinking, yeah, right. What does he think he's doing? Let's see. Who are the professional fishermen here, and who's the carpenter's son? He might turn water into wine, but a vineyard owner can do that. He might heal sick people, but a good doctor does the same thing. He teaches us about Yahweh, but any rabbi in the synagogue does that. But let's humor this man. We'll see who has the last laugh. And suddenly there is a great rush on the water, and these nets, which several hours ago were empty, are now bursting. And maybe at first Peter is astonished by all of this. Fish were his business, his livelihood, and suddenly he had caught more than he can imagine. Selling would be easier than ever. Think of all the profit that could be made from this guy. But then Peter stops and begins to think, this man did it. He told us to put the nets down. We did, and look what happened. Maybe these stories about him are true. His voice had such power and command that I actually did what he asked. His eyes had such love for me, such hope, such promise. He wasn't made the fool of. I was. I can't be here with him. He better leave me. It's not good to be too near the Son of God. He wants too much, knows too much, and is too single-minded about spreading the good news of the kingdom. Peter and the crew are afraid. They fall to their knees before this man. But Jesus has the last laugh, the last pun. He tells them, don't be afraid. You didn't believe in yourself, but I believed in you. Follow me and dedicate yourselves to a reality bigger than yourself. Follow me and trust a wisdom and a power that is beyond your understanding. Follow me, and you'll catch others together with me, just like I caught you. And Peter, witnessing the power of Jesus, confesses his sinfulness, receives immediate forgiveness, and follows Jesus. Now, like Peter in the Gospel, Isaiah in the first reading today also feels unworthy to stand in the presence of God. Isaiah's confession finds immediate forgiveness. And so when Isaiah hears God calling, "Who will go for me?" Isaiah responds, "Here I am, send me." God is always ready to forgive us, to fill us with grace and power to follow Him, to live out the good news. We may not believe in ourselves, but that's okay. God believes in us. God is asking us to go into uncharted waters, to leave everything familiar and secure. And only when we recognize our own sinfulness and feel the healing power of His mercy, only when we are willing to leave everything the world tells us is important, to let go of our nets, to drop our nets and follow Him, to strive for a greater good, only then will we be able to respond to that same call from God, "Who will go for me?" And willingly and lovingly, we can respond, "Here I am, send me." For Wineskins, I'm Deacon Mike Kajancic.
Does God have a moment of insight for you? Is it today? Whether your life seems empty, routine, or successful, God may have chosen this moment to reveal His power, His calling, and His wisdom to you. Listen with your heart, then cry out in gratitude and obedience, "Here am I, Lord, send me." Wineskins is made possible through the annual Bishop's Appeal, the Catholic Communication Campaign, and St. Paul's Catholic Books and Gifts. The program is produced by CTNY, the Catholic Telecommunications Network of Youngstown. I'm Father Jim Corda, saying thank you for being with us. Have a blessed Ash Wednesday and a prayerful Lenten season.